One missile hits a tanker. At first, it just looks like a fire at sea. But the problem doesn't stay in the middle of the water. Ships slow down, routes shift, and suddenly the whole corridor starts to feel dangerous. This is the Strait of Hormuz, and it doesn't have to fully close to hurt the world. It only has to become risky enough that ships stop trusting the route. Then, the shock reaches people nowhere near the Persian Gulf. Fuel gets more expensive, shipping gets tighter, and the cost starts showing up in food, power, and the things people depend on every day. On a map, the Strait of Hormuz doesn't look like much, just this narrow strip of water at the mouth of the Persian Gulf. But size is the wrong way to judge it, because when the world relies on a channel that tight, narrow can become dangerous very fast. This is one of the real pressure points of modern life. Massive tankers move through here every day, carrying oil from the Persian Gulf to markets across Asia, Europe, and beyond. One official estimate puts that daily flow at around 20 million barrels a day in 2024. That's roughly 1/5 of the world's oil supply. So this isn't just some local route, it's one of the critical hinges in the global oil system. And when a hinge like this starts to shake, oil is usually the first thing that feels the shock. The first place people feel it is at the pump. Not because gas stations run dry overnight, but because markets start pricing in fear right away. Diesel comes next, and diesel keeps the trucks carrying your groceries on the road, powers construction equipment, and moves most of the stuff we never think about until it suddenly costs more. So even when the shelves look full, the costs underneath them are already starting to shift. Every mile gets a little more expensive. Every delivery carries a little more pressure. Then aviation feels the hit. Cargo planes, passenger flights, fast shipping, all of it depends on fuel prices staying stable and predictable. And oil doesn't stop at the pump. It runs through plastics, packaging, petrochemicals, and the supply chains behind almost everything we manufacture. That's why one route under pressure can quickly become a problem inside your own house. The first shock hits oil, but the real pain starts when it leaks into everything else. But oil isn't the only pressure point. Natural gas moves more quietly, and that's exactly what makes it so easy to underestimate. LNG leaves terminals in the Persian Gulf aboard massive tankers, and most of those exports still have to squeeze through Hormuz. The numbers are hard to ignore. Qatar and the UAE send most of their LNG through this route, making Hormuz part of nearly 1/5 of global LNG trade. And that reach stretches far beyond the Gulf. It can touch Europe's heating bills, electricity costs, and the energy decisions governments make long before winter hits. In Asia, it reaches ports, factories, and manufacturing lines that depend on stable energy to keep moving. So the gas problem doesn't have to arrive with a loud bang. Sometimes it shows up quietly, as higher costs, slower decisions, and one more system that suddenly feels a lot less stable. Here's the problem. People hear Hormuz and instantly picture a full blockade, but the damage can start long before anything is officially closed. If insurers think one trip is suddenly riskier, the cost changes. If shipping companies think the risk is serious, for the crew, the cargo, or the ship itself, their decision changes too. One ship may still go through, another may wait offshore, another may slow down, because nobody wants to make the wrong call first. Then every extra step adds friction. More checks, more escorts, more waiting. And every hour cargo sits at sea costs money nobody planned to spend. Inside an operations room, the question becomes very practical. Do we go now? Do we wait? Or do we pay more just to move safely? And that's enough to push costs higher. The waterway can still be open while the business around it gets slower, tighter, and more expensive. When ships hesitate, the first bill doesn't always show up at a gas pump. It can show up in shipping quotes, delivery windows, and orders that suddenly cost more to fulfill. Then it moves into food, long before the food ever reaches a store. Fertilizer, farm inputs, refrigerated transport, all of it moves through the same pressured system. Ports feel it too. Containers don't have to disappear, they just have to move slower, cost more, and arrive less predictably. UN trade analysts warn the ripple effects don't stay regional. They can reach energy markets, maritime transport, and global supply chains. And the pressure doesn't land evenly. Wealthier countries can absorb some of the cost. More fragile economies feel the same shock much faster. For businesses, it turns into some very practical choices: raise prices, delay orders, cut margins, or just hope the next shipment doesn't cost even more. And markets don't wait for the final damage report. They move on fear, supply risk, and the chance that tomorrow gets more expensive than today. That's the second wave, not fire on the water, but the bill that follows it. And then comes the obvious question: why not just go around? The world does have backup routes. That sounds reassuring until you actually look at what those backups can carry. Pipelines can move some oil around the strait, but pipelines are fixed systems. They can't scale up overnight, and they weren't built to replace what Hormuz carries. The scale is the problem. Around 20 million barrels a day can move through Hormuz, while the backup pipeline capacity is only a fraction of that. And LNG is even harder to shift around. It needs specialized ships, dedicated terminals, tight schedules, and buyers ready to receive it. Markets don't need proof that the backup plan has failed. If traders think the backup routes may not be enough, prices can start moving before any real shortage shows up. Governments know that. They start pulling on every lever they have: storage reserves, emergency supply lines, and quiet conversations about what happens if this lasts. That's when the options start running thin. There are options, but not unlimited ones. And when everyone needs the same backup at the same time, the backup starts to feel a lot smaller. So Hormuz isn't just one fragile route. It's a reminder that modern life depends on narrow paths most people never see. By the end, the sea can look calm again. But calm water doesn't mean the risk has disappeared. The real story was never just one tanker, one headline, or a single moment of panic. It was what happens when the world starts doubting a route it depends on every single day. That doubt can travel a very long way, from shipping lanes in the Persian Gulf to energy bills in Europe, factory floors in Asia, and kitchen tables far from any coastline. Modern life looks stable from the outside, but it runs on invisible routes, narrow passages, and fragile systems that most people never think about until something goes wrong. The Strait of Hormuz is one of those vital passages, and if the world stops trusting it, the pressure doesn't stay in the shipping lanes. It starts showing up in prices, delays, bills, and decisions people never connect back to the sea.